Hello and welcome to the Beyond the Label podcast. My name is Tempesta and I am a current senior at Assumption University, majoring in political science and communications and media. It is an honor to be the host of this podcast, and I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to tune in. Now, go grab a blanket, curl up on the couch, cue up the podcast from your car, or go for a really nice walk while listening. Whichever your personal preference is, welcome to Beyond the Label. Back again with the Beyond the Label podcast, brought to you by yours truly, Molly Tempesta. Thank you for tuning in to the second episode of the Beyond the Label podcast, known as Voices of Vulnerability. I know many of you are probably wondering, what does Beyond the Label mean? What could this podcast be about? What is the purpose of this? And most importantly, is it worth my time? There is validity to your curiosity, which is why I'm going to tell you all of my hopes and dreams for this podcast series. This podcast will hopefully encourage listeners to lend a listening ear while opening their hearts and minds to radical acceptance. The purpose of this podcast is to influence those who quite literally look beyond the label. Clever, huh? All right, well, all jokes aside, we will now begin the second episode of the Beyond the Label podcast called The Voices of the Vulnerable. In today's episode, I will be sharing my own personal story and experience living with chronic illness and disease for almost 2 decades. I will also be sharing stories of resilient and strong survivors of chronic illness, disease, and disability. I cannot thank you enough for tuning in today, and I am so excited for you to hear from us, the voices of the vulnerable. Now, for today's episode, I will be sharing my story and experience living with type 1 diabetes. I am currently, as I said, a senior in college. I am 22 years old, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 6 years old. I was diagnosed in July of 2008, and I have been living with this chronic disease and illness now for around 16 years, going on 17 years. It's really hard to fathom that it's almost 2 decades. I am at a point in my life where I really only remember life with type 1 than without it. I am going to be sharing my story today alongside my mother for many reasons, because I feel that when you are living life with a chronic illness, it does not just affect you, but it affects those who love you and live with you and are around you all the time. They are impacted in a different capacity, but in my opinion, they are impacted, if not just as much, a very, very immense amount. So this story that I'm going to be sharing with you is one that I never really share. I don't think I've ever talked about living with type 1 diabetes publicly. There are many people in my life who are friends and acquaintances and coworkers and, current peers of mine that do not know that I have type 1 diabetes, and I've kind of made this intentional. I have never wanted my disease to define me, which I have very rarely talked about because of this reason. And I think also a big part of that is, and we touched upon this in the first episode, it's because the stigma that just really surrounds living with diabetes, and it unfortunately has just really affected me in such a detrimental way. The judgment and preconceived notions have caused me to truly just kind of emotionally shut down when thinking about my disease and talking about it, and I never really open up. And also because of all of the trauma and things that I've been through with not only just my diagnosis, and, it's impacted me. I mean, type 1 diabetics, and especially females, are affected in such a different way that I have unfortunately experienced some issues and some traumas that stem from this, and I just have really never unpacked this before now. So, if you could please give me grace, and also grace to the individuals of stories that I will be sharing with you all, I would appreciate that more than ever. Now, for now, I want you to just sit back, relax, and get ready to listen to, as I said, the voices of the vulnerable. So I am actually going to bring out my mother right now. As I said, when living with chronic disease, I just feel that it's so important to talk to and kind of gain perspective of those who are loved ones who are also impacted by this disease, but also because, as I kind of said, I've had some repressed trauma and memories. And again, it also was 16 years ago. So there are a lot of cracks and gaps in my memory, but my mother, can recall every detail just like it happened yesterday. So I'm going to actually bring her on right now, and we are going to share my story and our shared experience of type 1 diabetes. Alrighty, now it is an honor to introduce my mother, Cara Tempesta. So welcome, Mom. Thank you so much for being here today. And we're going to be sharing about my experience living with type 1 diabetes. But I said before I'm bringing you on now that I think it's really a shared experience. I think that when you especially have a child, but when you have a loved one or a friend or someone who's very important in your life living with this disease, it affects you too, which is why I just kind of wanted to have a conversation and open dialogue and not only share the vulnerable side of this, which is really hard, and I'm so thankful to have the opportunity, in this course to have a platform to do so, but to also continue to shatter the stigma, because as we know, that is a never-ending battle living with diabetes. It's something that we face incessantly and constantly. So I guess, I was sharing with them, I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 6. That was about 16 years ago. Details a little hazy, but I said, you can recall this story like it happened yesterday. You can recall all of the details. You just have a remarkable memory. So
I'm a mom whose child was sick, so that never leaves you.
Right. So I guess, do you want to just begin by kind of setting the scene when you started noticing I wasn't feeling well? Maybe we want to start with the back-to-back strep throat. That would be great.
Okay. So you were 6 years old, and the summer, it was June, and we had taken you to the doctors. You weren't feeling good, and you had a strep throat. So they put you on 6 days of penicillin, and you still weren't feeling great. And I remember on the last day of your penicillin, you said, Mom, my throat is so sore. And I said, how can that be? You just got off.
Right.
So I said, call the doctor. So I called the pediatrician again, and she said, why don't you bring her back down? So we went back down to the doctors, and they said it's very rare, but she has a back-to-back strep. So we're going to put her on another regimen of antibiotics, and then that should do it. So we were scheduled to go on vacation, and she's like, no, you're fine. So, I brought the medication, and we took you on vacation, and literally it happened so quickly.
Right.
During that second strep throat. And we had gone on vacation to Storyland up in New Hampshire and Santa's Village, and I noticed that every day, it was warm out, obviously, it was like the middle of July, and you just were really, really, really warm, like always overheated. I said, geez, this little back-to-back strep throat's really taken a lot from her.
Right.
But you were kind of having a couple little accidents, which, you're 6 and you're sick, so
right.
It's not uncommon.
I just remember drinking water.
You were super thirsty all the time. But again, it was the summertime. And I'm going to be quite honest, Dad and I never had any.
Well, we also went to the doctor several times, and every time they said it was strep throat.
I never even thought type 1 or diabetes or anything, because I truly had no experience with it. It never even occurred to me. I just figured she has a really, really bad virus, and this is what we're doing, and she's on a second round of antibiotics, and she'll be okay, but you weren't getting better.
So you decided to
I said to
pack
Dad,
up and
let's leave. We're packing up and we're going home. Called the doctor again. Unfortunately, our regular doctor was on vacation, so we took a new woman who was new to the practice. Her name is Dr. Clock, and she diagnosed you with type 1. She wasn't 100% sure, but she said, I suspect based on this. She was new, and she was a crackerjack, and you've been with her ever since. And I thank her every day. You saved your life, and I love her. And, we were told to get into children's ASAP. We dropped your brother and sister off to your grandparents. We went into children's, completely floored because, again, no history. I truly didn't know much about type 1 at all. I didn't even know it existed.
I probably didn't fit the stereotype as to where your mind went when you found out.
I didn't even know children could get it. I didn't know it was, and I guess the first part was you were in the hospital for almost 6 days, Molly. I never left your side.
I know.
Dad took kids in and out, and I never left your side because you were petrified.
Yep.
And even when people would come in and visit you, Molly, it was an automatic stigma. How could she? She's just 6 years old. She's tiny. She says,
and I was losing weight.
Preconceived notions.
Right.
People like, how could she have it? She's tiny. She's only 6. She's a child. Well, there's such thing as type 1, juvenile diabetes, which, again, is an autoimmune disease in the same family as, like, Graves or rheumatoid arthritis. Or this just happens to be with when you got your virus, out of all the rheumatoid arthritis is Crohn's, this attacked your pancreas and shut it off. So unlike type 2 diabetes, who you still have a functioning pancreas, it just slows down or what have you, your pancreas just completely, the virus shut it off.
Right.
That portion of your pancreas no longer functioned at all.
Right.
It was gone. So there was no cure. You know what I mean?
There is no cure still.
No, God love you. We all went through education. And it was a learning process for everyone. You're dealing with something at 6 years old that you truly, you're this happy, peppy, bouncy, bubbly little girl. And, it changes you because all of a sudden you had to think about what you ate. You had to give yourself shots. You had to take blood sugar. It kind of took a little bit of we always try to do fun things, but in your little brain, it takes things.
It's just hard to be spontaneous.
Life
exactly.
Got to get from you, which is such a shame for you and for so many like you that we didn't even know existed because then we had to educate ourselves and talk to doctors and talk to nutritionists and talk to endocrinologists, and a world opened up of doctors and what have you, of people I never even imagined existed.
Right.
And you had to learn how to give yourself shots. We had to learn how to take blood sugars. We had to learn to wake you up at night to make sure you're okay. So it affected your statins. I had to go to the school, bring your supplies all the time. The nurses there needed you to be educated.
Right.
During the day, you would have to leave class and go down, so of course there's always going to be stigma because people will be like, why did you have to leave their classroom? And you'd be like, Mom, I hate leaving the class. And so it shows you very early on that even though, and I'm not going to lie, Molly, when you first got it, a couple people would say the most insensitive things to me, like, oh, Kara, it's bad and I'm so sorry she has this, but thank God it's not cancer. Well, of course, thank God it's something she can live with. But it's not a great thing for a little 6-year-old to have her whole life turned upside down.
And it's something that would never change. I would have this for my entire life.
Exactly. But we always try to look at it positively, but everyone's human.
Right.
There'd be days that you'd be like, Mom, I just don't want to have it anymore. And I'd be like, you know what, Molly? I don't want you to have it anymore either, honey, but there's nothing we can do. We're going to make the best of this situation, and you're going to be the healthiest little girl there is, and you have everybody who loves and supports you. But you can't stop, the things that come out of other people's mouths. All you can do is hope for educating people.
Right.
And we joined, the Juvenile Diabetes Network, and we started earning money for a cure. And we formed a team called Molly's Marchers, and we put high-heeled sneakers on the T-shirts, and we marched for a cure and continue to raise money. And you hope every day, because since the day you got it till now, life has not always been easy.
Right.
And there are And it's a lot because it's you never wanted it to define you, and it's your story to tell.
Right.
And it's not private news because you haven't always met people who understood or people who were sensitive.
Right.
You've encountered some not so nice people in the world, unfortunately. Right. And I always wanted to protect you and take care of you. But once you grow up and go out into the world and, you're not right under my thumb, there's only so much I can do. So I guess the biggest thing I say is people need empathy. People need compassion. People need education and understanding, because at any time in any of our lives, anybody can be stricken with anything.
And, that's the whole vision for this podcast. It's called Beyond the Label. You know what I mean? Like, people hear the word diabetes and they just think of what
negative connotations
they think of, and the negative connotations. Yeah. And in the first episode, I really talked about the stigma associated with diabetes and tried to shatter it and debunk, just complete false information. And, as you know, a big part of, the previous episode. So one thing that we discussed in the previous episode was the Disney Channel. And I know you and Dad remember plenty of episodes where diabetes was just being mocked, or, there was a distinct episode in The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody where the mom's just yelling at her son for eating a candy bar, and she's like, stop, you're going to get diabetes, like, we're going to change your diet, yada, yada, yada. And as a child, you made it very clear to me, like, this isn't your fault, you got a back-to-back strep throat, like, type 1's different than type 2. But watching those shows and having, and I don't want to, like, get emotional, but, like,
that's okay, Mom. Well, because you know what? Half the time you would have friends over, and the minute they mentioned something like that, all the attention turned to you.
Right.
And I always felt like I had to swoop in and protect you and say,
and
guys,
sometimes
do you
I would
understand
just think,
what it is?
And
because
sometimes I would just
no matter
think,
whether she eats a bowl of fruit, a bowl of vegetables, or a candy bar, it affects her the same way. And she has what I used to try and say it so simply to people. She is allergic to sugar.
Right. But sometimes you need it.
But sometimes she need, but I'm saying, so she's allergic to food basically because everything affects her the same way.
And I just remember thinking to myself though, like, my mom's my mom. Like, are these shows right? Like, is it my fault?
No, I know. But that's what used to make me so angry, because you would think writers of a show, don't they have fact checkers? Don't they have people who know better?
And especially the Disney Channel.
When you put that stigma on something and make it a joke, it's so hurtful.
And especially the Disney Channel, when the intended audience is, like, very impressionable.
Right.
And students are just going to, not students, I keep saying students, children are just going to take what they hear at face value, and they're going to just take it as the truth. And if the Disney Channel says it, of course they could never be wrong.
Right.
So that was a really tough thing.
Yeah.
But then just
Molly,
kind of...
I even remember when you came home from the hospital, me and Dad watching Blue Bloods on a Friday night. Mm-hmm. And this was all new to us. And it happened to be about a girl who was abducted, and she actually had type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And they didn't give any education. They didn't do anything. And at the end, when the girl was returned, the family made her a cake. And then the cops like, why are you giving her cake? And just the whole show put such a bad taste in my mouth. Right. And just the lack of information and erroneous information that I actually wrote something.
Yeah.
I made a comment on, you know what I mean? Like, I was just, I remember calling Channel 5 locally trying to get the phone number, because I was just so upset about how poorly it was handled. Because I was like, thank God she's sleeping and not up watching this, because this is the stuff that hurts people.
Right. And just, like, not only just that, but, like, over the years, obviously, like, I got over it. I think that because of the stigma, I kind of just shut down. And I think this podcast is the first time, I mean, but, like, the first time, like, we've really unpacked this. Like, we haven't had conversations like this. And because life gets busy, and you know what? I live this condition literally 24/7 every day of my life. I don't get a vacation from this disease. I don't ever get a mental break. So sometimes I just don't have the energy to just continue talking about it. But I do think, sorry, I keep getting so emotional. I didn't expect this, but
I know.
I do think it's important to kind of just, be able to have this platform and opportunity to just have these important conversations because, even just kind of growing up, especially as a girl, when you're, especially in the very formative years as a teenager, where now I've had it for 16 years. I have memorized how many carbohydrates are in an orange slice to a bowl of pasta to whatever.
Yep.
So when you're looking at labels and nutritional content all the time, it's also just so exhausting.
It's overwhelming.
And there's plenty of type 1 diabetics who have developed eating disorders.
True.
People also don't realize that when you have to manually take insulin, because it's not the one that we're naturally producing through our pancreas, you are at risk of gaining more weight because you are administering.
You become insulin resistant.
Right. Yep. And when you've had type 1 for so long, you're just at risk for more complications. And, your eyesight can get worse. Your hearing, your kidneys, this and that. And it just becomes mentally draining. Like when you're
100%.
living, and again, as you know more than anyone, Mom, it's not cancer.
You're the one who's suffering, honey.
It's not cancer. Like, it could be.
But it would be nice to not have it.
So much worse. But when you're living and dealing with something 24/7 every day of your life, it is just mentally exhausting.
Of course it is.
And I just think that this opportunity to be so vulnerable and open up about it is just also going to give another layer of a perspective. Like, here's the difference between the types. Here's what I have. Here's how it's affected me, but here's how it's currently affecting me. And, there's a lot of negative sides to it. It's mentally draining. There's a lot of burnout. There's exhaustion. Yeah. Sometimes you just simply don't feel well.
Right.
But also,
a lot of doctor's appointments.
Right.
A lot of keeping track of medications, ordering medical devices,
and it's
making
just
sure you stay on top of things.
And anxiety if I even just leaving college and going home for 2 days and being like, do I have enough insulin to get me to live these next 2 days?
Absolutely.
Am I going to forget something? Is the insulin that I'm taking refrigerated from my college dorm to that 2-hour drive to my fridge at home, is it no longer going to work and be effective? Should I bring more and then I'm just going to run out of it quicker? It's just so many, questions and so much planning and so much anxiety about something.
The spontaneity is gone. Yep.
But also at the same time, I had to grow up a lot quicker. I've become more organized. I think individuals living with chronic illness and disease are just very resilient and strong, and we are problem solvers and we're organized. And
Molly, it also made you who you are.
Right.
You're compassionate.
Right.
You're a good friend. You're a good student. You're a good leader.
Well, thank you.
I'm proud to be your mother, the way you handle everything every day of your life. And that is not easy. It's not easy for anyone going through life nowadays.
Right.
Just living life in general. You know what I mean? It's not an easy world. And then to have all that on top of it.
Yep. Yeah. It's just.
You're amazing.
Thank you. And you're amazing. And oh my God, this is so embarrassing.
Well, it's real.
I did not mean to make this episode Voices of the Vulnerable so vulnerable.
But that's okay, because that's what you do. Because you know what? As you know, people who have it, and I know family, and it's not just me as a mother, because I do talk to mothers all the time who have it. And when you were young, people used to call me all the time, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you handle it? And it's also, you have a sister and brother who have lived it.
Right.
They're your advocates. They're your best friends. They watch you. If anyone ever says anything to you, they're all over them.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't know about it, you make one negative comment, someone in this family will educate you pretty fast.
Yep. No, you could not be more right on that one. Yep. So,
so I guess the basic message is education and really think before you speak.
Right. And I think also just
life is not easy.
I think if anyone, this is like for people who don't have diabetes or, have any knowledge of, this is important for them to listen. But also, if you are an individual with type 1, like, just know that whatever you're feeling is so valid.
Yep.
And that it is
You're not
so
alone.
important to know you're not alone. And also, it is so important to speak up about this and talk about every single angle of it, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, all of it. Because, you know, as I said earlier, we don't really talk about this that much.
Being a college student who has type 1 is just another huge element.
Yep.
So it's not easy, but it's doable.
Totally.
And you just need support and love and and compassion and people who understand.
Right. And I know you're personally going through quite a bit at this time, so I cannot thank you enough for just, I mean, you have lost so many nights of sleep.
Oh, stop.
Over me. And then just, you know, you're going through stuff on your own too. I appreciate you being here.
I'm fine, honey. I'm going to be fine. I'm okay. I'm okay. So.
Wow, this is like a very
Stop.
vulnerable episode.
It is a vulnerable episode, but that's really what people need to know. We're all human beings.
Look beyond the label.
Have issues, and just
look beyond the label and just
look beyond the label.
Never
and
judge
just be a good person
a book by its cover.
Yeah, until you walk in someone's shoes.
Yep.
Be careful what you say.
I feel like you recorded this first episode because everything you're saying is just, we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well.
It's cathartic. It's good to get it out.
It is, yeah, it is.
You know?
But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
I love you.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So I know that was a lot and it was very emotional, and I feel like I was the most vulnerable I've ever been in some time. And especially now realizing and reflecting that so many people are going to hear that is giving me a lot of anxiety. But truly, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. And, you know, the sentiment I hope that has just been made abundantly clear throughout this series is to just always look beyond the label, break those barriers, shatter that stigma, treat people the way you want to be treated, and just realize that you never, ever know what someone's going through. So just give them some grace, compassion, empathy, and understanding. And thank you so much. Please tune in to our final episode of the Beyond the Label podcast, which is going to be episode 3, called The Weight of Words, where I'm going to be continuing some stories that we did not get to today, sharing those, and then also providing an advice column for things to not say to someone with particular illness, disabilities, and situations of loss and suffering. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great day.